I want to introduce my BFF, Shelly Zalis. Most of you have heard of Shelly. She's the CEO of the Female Quotient, an organization that brings women together and helps us professionally network with each other and basically elevate so that all boats rise with the tide. So Shelly, thank you for joining us. You're going to do a little bit of an intro to our conversation about Trailblazers at the Helm, innovating in a completely evolving technology landscape.
First of all, thrilled to be here, and thank you, my bestie. We talk about trailblazers, and oftentimes a lot of our best trailblazers are invisible in the equation. And so one of the most important things is to make the invisible visible. And when you think about today, which leads to tomorrow, and the future, which is now, I'd bet on women. And I would bet on women for the future, because what we have been missing in the algorithm is the female developers, the female technologists, the innovators, the data that we need to put into the equation. And 10 years ago, I coined a phrase, the algorithm for equality, having no idea that AI was going to be so prevalent today. And we are missing so much data in the system. We talk a lot about bias, but if we don't put women in the equation in every aspect, in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the media, in the labs, in studios, in medicine, we have big issues. And I learned something recently that blew my mind. And I'm going to say this, and let's see if this resonates and processes. But did you know that mice don't menstruate? Weird. What's the implication of that? All of our testing has been done on lab rats. So when you think about even health tech, femtech, we are missing so much in that equation. And so we say when you add more women to any equation, there's a return on equality. And profiling all of these stories in advance and ensuring that we have representation at the table. This is not diversity for diversity's sake. This is representation that not only is important for reflection, but is very important to unbias the bias, to make sure that the data is in every single piece and every aspect of what we do today in technology. And so when we think about AI and generative AI and data repeating itself and using historical data, the other fact that I learned, which shocked me, we didn't even have women in clinical trials until 1993. Hello, 1993, which is crazy. And when you look at all of the innovations that we have today, the ones that have been misses are the ones that did not put representation into the equation. When you look at airbags in cars, the number one fatality in airbags is women, because they were not developed. They were developed on male dummies. Our bones are different, our bone structures. Think about those implications. So, trailblazers. We have amazing women trailblazers. And by highlighting, showcasing amazing women in the business of tech and in tech from every aspect, can't live without us. So incredibly important. And that's really what we need to showcase, highlight, talk about not only the importance of the innovation, but also for the data implications of junk in, junk out, or good in, great outcomes come out on the other end. So thrilled to be here, and I can't wait for you to hear from these amazing experts.
Thank you, Shelly. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's get into it. I'm Mitra Best. I'm a partner at PwC, and I lead technology impact. I was the Chief Innovation Officer for almost a decade, and around the pandemic, I decided that I really wanted to focus my attention on tech for social impact. And that's when I changed my focus, and really excited that I'm at this inflection point in time where we can actually see a lot of acceleration in the things that we've been trying to do. So I'm going to go and just from right here and ask everybody to introduce yourselves.
I'm Xin Pan. So I spent the last 25 plus years leading innovation as an entrepreneur, startup founder, and as a board member, as also as an investment banker as well. So thank you.
I think you left out all the good stuff about the companies that you sold.
Yeah, so currently I serve on I serve on boards, public company and private company boards. I'm also working as a M&A advisor, working with entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs for organic and inorganic growth strategy and M&A advice. So my first company actually was sold to NVIDIA. So leveraging technology, and I used to work for Silicon Graphics, and as the PC industry, the PC revolution came. So basically, the idea is how can we leverage the PC graphics card, the cluster of them, to do large compute or large graphics. At that time, the software is designed for single CPU, single GPU. In order to leverage the cluster of a graphics card, you really have to rewrite your code. So basically, my co-founder and I, we basically came up with a graphics virtualization platform to allow the application to take advantage of cluster of GPUs without changing code. So that which resulted eventually being bought by NVIDIA, remained to be a core technology till today. Thank you.
This is why I wanted to hear the full story. Thank you, Melody.
To follow that, I'm a career innovator of consumer conveniences, and my most stellar and maybe visible accomplishment is a redesign of the McDonald's in-store service system. So I make it faster and easier for you to get some food on the go. I was in food service for 12 years, 10 at McDonald's, 2 at Panera, and I jumped into the startup world. I am currently leading Live Labs. We are making pelvic floor fitness easier and more affordable. So think of us as the McDonald's of pelvic floor fitness. There is a connection. We've developed, and I'm just going to show it, this simple pelvic spring to help augment women's existing pelvic floor strength and reduce some symptoms they might experience, as well as semi-automated health coaching software. So it's been fun to go from consulting to corporate to startup life and learn along the way.
Thank you, Melody.
Well, we're clearly having a lot of diversity on our panel today after following these two wonderful women. My name is Sonia Fife, and I lead our consumer packaged goods practice and industry at Google Cloud. I've worked for about 4 years at Google, and I really am passionate about driving digital transformation in consumer industries. And that's because before working at Google, I spent almost 30 years working at Procter & Gamble. So my background is really in business, in the industry, about value accretiveness and creation among global large businesses. And today I work at the intersection of that and technology, and love the role of being an interface of where technology is just going at such rapid pace and how it can really be in service to help create value in businesses.
I would just like to say that it's not possible that you worked anywhere that long and look this young. So hats off. You're going to have to give me your tips later. So nice to meet you all. I'm Lindsay Miller, and I'm here to hopefully balance the panel from an industry perspective a bit with my energy nerd angle. I'm committed to the energy transition and also technology. I have corporate and board leadership roles in the advancement of the energy transition. I come from an embedded computing and telecom background, and as part of my journey, I started up the data center power conversion for a joint venture of Platinum Equity and Emerson Network Power. And today I work for Residio. We are the owner of Honeywell Home and First Alert products. And so I'm fortunate to lead a great team there and also lead the energy management practice. Nice to meet you all.
As the senior vice president, I forgot to say that. Okay. All right, so you can see, I think it's important to know the background of all of us up here so that when you're thinking about your questions, you can address them accordingly. But we wanted to have a panel that was diverse in the background and in industry and function. So let's see how different and similar your experiences are. I'm going to ask some general questions. We are at an inflection point where technology is just accelerating so rapidly that we can't keep up with it. What do you think in each of your organizations are the most significant obstacles to innovation, given that the technology terrain is literally shifting under your feet? Let's start with you.
So I'm on several boards and advisory boards, and I think there one common obstacle is balancing profitability and also spending on innovation. So basically, we're public companies, and you have to have a certain metrics for their shareholders. But you cannot. You have to balance the spending, right, and the profitability. That's one obstacle. The other thing is that it's the skilled workforce training, labor shortage. It's a very common concern as well, and then I think for all of that, I let others see first.
Okay, great. Thank you. So basically, the ROI of the heavy investment required for the technology, and then having the talent to actually develop those.
Yeah. The other thing is one of the company is so the whole. Actually, I never knew presidential election is so relevant to what I do nowadays, because some of the company is energy company. So energy company is very policy driven, and also the whole geopolitical tension policy is really tariffs is affecting it. So basically, that's another concern to navigate. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Melody?
In healthcare, you might think of it this way, but self-care is the number one type of care there is. You have a rash, you make a decision, do I call a doctor, do I try this ointment, do I do nothing? That's you exercising your self-care rights, as it were. But developing products for people to help themselves bumps up against issues of control and expertise. So we've probably heard of Dr. Google. You know, Dr. Google doesn't always have the right answer. If Dr. Google does, you may not understand.
Okay, Sonia's getting upset about that.
No, I'm all for it. So technology empowers, but it also enables control. And I think in the field that I work in, this tension between who gets to decide what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do and with what data is truly being, that tension is real and powerful right now. Insurance companies have a lot of control over the incentives to do one or the other. So do regulators, that is policy. Fun fact, the social media platforms actually currently regulate what anatomical terminology you can use in your advertising. So this is the tension, and so a lot of it's technology driven because the censorship that I'm describing is automated. And of course it's got good intent, but then it gets implemented in ways that weren't expected. So a lot more to say, but those tensions are something that technology is both creating and addressing.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer the question more from the standpoint of consumer goods who, I talk across a number of these companies, and for sure, there are many obstacles, some of which were mentioned already, as, you think about being able to keep up with just an astounding pace of innovation that's taking place in the areas of technology. And candidly, for many of these companies in CPG and beyond, there's a little bit of inertia. We know about a third of these companies are either evaluating or testing. They're not quite scaling yet. And many of those obstacles relate to trying to figure out what should their AI strategy be, what model or technology should they buy, do they need to restructure or change the way the organization is working. And one of the things that we do is really to help try and overcome those obstacles by sharing the importance of foundationally helping companies think about areas like responsible AI and security, but also helping to share best practices across companies who are moving in some of these directions, creating playgrounds for safe zones for company employees to begin to experiment, and at the same time creating those centers of excellence where the question is actually not what your technology strategy is often, or what your AI strategy is, but what is your business strategy and how AI comes in service to that to create business value. And that's a fundamental shift that unlocks these obstacles for companies and helps them to move forward at a faster pace and scale further.
I love what you said about the business strategy, and I'll take a different industry angle on that, which I think one of the big problems that we're facing right now is energy efficiency. And in my work, we think about buildings. So buildings are contributing to 37% of carbon emissions. And all companies have compliance for ESG and reporting accountability that is necessary about what your emissions are, scope 1, scope 2, et cetera. But we need to shift away from compliance and just checkbox to actually taking that and making it better for other businesses and for your own business. And when I think about what's happening, we have a huge AI infrastructure build out with tons of data centers being constructed, and that is going to have a toll. But it's also even going to drive up the price of energy to businesses and to residential customers. So we all need to prepare for uncertainty and the inevitability of increasing energy costs and what that's going to do to business. So let's shift the ESG conversation from compliance to business strategy and results and preparing for uncertainty. I think that's something that all business owners need to be thinking about, not just for their own business, but also for the businesses that they serve. How are you helping other businesses on that journey and better prepare?
That's a really great point. I was at a conference where it was all about utilities and the price of utility going up at the same time as the demand is actually tenfold going up. So how do you manage the cost and the supply and demand? So it's an interesting conversation, which makes me think about what I've seen at CES so far. I've been really excited about all the gadgets and all the innovations and everyone talking about the future of their product. What I haven't heard enough about, which I would love to hear from you, is how are we discussing the next innovations with our customers? So are we talk a lot about adoption challenges, right? We come up with something, we have adoption. Are we actually starting with the North Star of what the customers want and if they actually need this and if it's in service to something they need or if it's in service to elevating their human experience? So I've been looking a lot at what's out there and thinking about that. I would love to hear your thoughts, and anybody can jump in and we can go around. Melody, you want to?
Yeah, I think that when you're I'm a R&D professional, product developer, so always jumping in with ideas. This would be great. This would be great. You see a new technology. How can I apply that? And it's easy to fall into the trap of applying the technology. And you always do it. Like, I know there's a problem. I thought about the customer. I'm applying this technology. It's in their service. But boy, you got to get out of the office, watch them use it, learn about what they think it does or doesn't do. And I have a failure story to share. So we developed a virtual care experience for women with pelvic floor disorders. And we thought we were being human-centered, but we also were being engineering-centric, and we were collecting loads of data, and we were going to use that data through AI to personalize the experience. And in classic fashion, we created the tools, and people did not use them as intended. They did not use them as intended. The data didn't collected. The personalization turned out to be meaningless anyway, because they personalized their own experience based on what they learned. So we were able, coming out of that failure, to shrink down the need and the technology we were going to use to something much simpler. So it has a happy ending. But boy, was I kicking myself. Did it again. That temptation is just always there. You get excited about what's possible, and you just have to temper it with how it's really going to play out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of context in how people feel when they're on the customer journey. And a lot of us are technically minded or design thinking minded. So we're going through these steps and we're trying to address the clunk and reduce the friction and all of that. But we're not spending enough time on how people feel. And I think Gen AI brings tons of inference and illumination to that process where people might not actually care about some of those graphs or data points or whatever you thought was useful to them. They just want to get to the end goal. So if we can just kind of accelerate that using the tools that AI has to give us with personalization, I think that's going to be a competitive edge.
I agree, and I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, particularly in the consumer goods space, how many of the products that you use every day, how we can get to successful innovation faster. I think it's true at Google, it's true in consumer goods, that definitely the consumer always has to be at the center of that work. And the good news is that we have so much more data about the consumer. The bad news is we have so much more data about the consumer. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is trying to leverage AI to be able to pull in what we know about the consumer from sentiment analysis, our ratings and reviews, the deep levels of research and development we've done, consumer insights from all of our studies, our ability to be able to pull in trends and really be able to integrate it and synthesize it in a way that becomes useful to predict at a much faster rate and to develop concepts and ideas and test them much more quickly, to be able to ensure that innovation can be done far more successfully and really delight consumers. But in my world, there are two things that need to remain at the heart of that. The first is the fact that the consumer and the user still has to be at the center, regardless of how much technology we have. And then the second is, to your point, Melody, that as we think about this, it's not abstracting from the professional who's doing the work, but is an aid to the human in the loop, right? And our ability to be able to integrate that successfully, I think, leads to much better and more successful outcomes.
So as an entrepreneur, startups always lack of funding. So, I agreed all with the consumer-centric approach. But the other thing is really focus on what's the must-have versus the nice-to-have. And then you only have so much money. And then the product market fit and must-have is the number one priority. And the other thing is that when you design the product, really need to take an iterative approach instead of designing as you give something to the consumer in their hand and continue to receive feedbacks and continue to iteratively innovate. That's the approach I think.
So how do you choose what projects or initiatives you're going to take on? If you're looking at customer feedback, if you're, looking at the data, deciphering it, all of that, do you have a rubric for doing that?
Oh, I have one that...
Bring it.
Well, like for when you're looking at potential acquisitions, you could use the same one for a product, but I usually think about two things. One is, does it enable you to have a competitive moat that you can defend? Because if you came up with something super cool, you can bet that people will copy it and there'll be a bunch of Me Too's. So do you have a lead that you can defend and sustain? And the other thing I think about is just the platform value. Aside from the IP ownership and the head start that you might get, are you collecting the data that is valuable for building a platform with network effects that is better than the competition? And are you inferring something and then automating with that data for the learning effects that actually lead to something super cool happening all by itself? And so that's the rubric that I always think about when you look at other places to innovate, because I do think smaller companies can innovate faster and better out of necessity. and because they must solve, than big companies. So that's something to place that priority on.
I love that, having the moat.
Since you mentioned the platform, I'm going to chime in. So technology moved very fast. And I think the company, smaller, especially small company, or even dark company, has a limited resource. So it's important to get excited, how to say, you can easily get excited with all the things you can do, but I think it's important to focus on what is your specific value add. And focus on leverage either what's the industry development, but to focus on your specific company's domain knowledge, the data, the language model, the basically it's we will see sometimes so like a domain specific language model, right? So that's important. And then the other thing is really continue to communicate with the customer, align with the strategic and customer alignment is very important.
Yeah, I think it's really different. Having worked in a very large corporation with a very well-oiled machine and working as a startup founder, there's continuous improvement innovation. And the way you go after prioritization is very much driven by bottlenecks in the system, what drives your business model. So McDonald's, it's obviously throughput. We were always solving for throughput and labor. And we did things that maybe weren't intuitive to solve that, but that at the end of the day was what drove the business. On the startup side, it can be much less clear. And to her point, the less you can, the more you can learn, having done very little, or working very efficiently, the better. Because a lot of ideas, and I love ideas, a lot of ideas really aren't high value, even though they seem cool. So there's a lot of self-discipline, I think, in what I'm doing now, where you just have to stay focused on your leading, most protectable idea and either prove it or not and keep going.
I think there's a lot of discussion in larger organizations around science projects and actually doing something, as you talked about earlier, the balancing the shareholder expectation. So that prioritization becomes really important in basically, if you're in a large organization, pitching it to the CFO or whoever's greenlighting your project, and if you're in a startup, whoever's holding your purse strings, right? So it becomes really important to have a model that you can defend and pursue with discipline. Otherwise, idea people can get a little bit lost in the labyrinth of innovation.
It's interesting. When you think about larger corporations, I think today they're probably acutely aware of the importance of being able to, yes, move at the speed of the consumer, but also do so in a way that allows them to succeed in a market where smaller companies continue to drive a lot of the growth that's taking place as well. And in general, having sort of that 70-20-10 framework that says, that yes, 10% is going to be highly disruptive, 20% is going to be transformational innovation. But on the core of the business that's driving a lot of that growth, being able to leverage AI, whether it's both being able to see and predict trends faster, accelerate the pace of product development. We have companies that are taking almost a third of the timing out of their ability to do so, but also having launch models that allow you to be able to meet the nuts and bolts of successful launches and do it faster, I think is a kind of agility and speed, particularly during the pandemic. I think even larger companies learned is a must-have. And so I think there is a transformation going on today that AI and generative AI in particular is significantly enabling. And now the question becomes for larger companies, not if the tools are there, but it becomes, am I able to harness those tools? And to your point of being able to drive that use across the organization, how do I think about scaling those tools so that we can have the full benefit of them and really see the change that we keep talking about?
So I've been, I did my thesis in AI, so I've been in this world for a long time, and it's so nice to finally be someplace where it's happening. But it's still not really happening as fast as we think it should be happening. So the scaling, we thought last year was going to be the scale year, and okay, so we're still in prototype and POC, but I'm hoping to see a lot more scale. In my point of view, and I would love to hear your thoughts, I think the convergence of a lot of different technologies will give us that momentum that we need to move forward. I mean, being here at CES, you get inspired with all that's going on with AI, with robotics, with IoT, with analytic, all of that stuff coming together. Have you seen any signs of new business models or new products or services that are coming out at the convergence of these technologies?
Absolutely.
So let's hear them.
So I'm nearsighted since I was in my teens. So I am not a very careful person. I step on glasses. I spend $400 or $500 on a pair of glasses, and then I end up stepping on it, breaking a few months later. So now that I don't buy, I have many glasses now. I buy it for very cheap. I buy virtual from Zennies or whatever, a lot of online store. I do virtual try-on, so I feel good about it. And my son came home with this a nice Levi jeans, with all customization. I said, "Oh, that looks expensive." He said, No, Mama, there's no additional cost. So they allowed you to customize your jeans. So this whole AR, VR in retail, that's all new business model. Yeah. So I love it. Yes.
It is fun. It is fun.
It is, and to build on that, I get super excited about the area of agentic AI and where that's going to head in terms of taking that so further. My example is certainly in the area of cosmetics. I mean, I remember going in, you'd go buy the item and you'd bring it home. With AI today, you're going in and you've got an advisor with whom you can have conversational capability to be able to choose and select that item. And we'll go even further, certainly with capabilities that we're bringing forward and others are bringing forward, is that ability to be able to observe the skin, use data ecosystems to combine what we know about, genomics and other capabilities, to be able to then help me understand what's the best product for both my skincare as well as my foundation, and then help to predict that. And of course, what's retail without a good cross-sell and upsell? So what other items can I buy that will go into the basket and help to enable that? These are new business models. And as I tell even consumer goods companies, today we see this now coming to life in the relationship that brands have with consumers changing. Mm-hmm. You think about the recipe assistant. Helm's has the observation of the fridge, and now I can tell you what you can cook with what you have with your leftovers, and also reduce waste. Your ability to be able to do this with pet advisors, and I've got a gardening advisors, and all of these I think will be really fusing technologies and will accelerate, I think, in terms of adoption based on where the consumer is headed and how easy we make it for the consumer to be able to adopt.
Yeah, it probably won't surprise you, Mitra, that my most interesting one is related to energy and energy usage. But I think there is an interesting trend going on where some automation that actually happened at a commercial or factory scale can now be disseminated into consumer use. And so, like yesterday in the Samsung booth, I saw that they were taking, basically automating, navigating a huge cargo ship technology into private boats. So you can just go to sleep and your boat will come into harbor or whatever. But for energy, same thing. We've had a high degree of automation and autonomous actions happening at the commercial level that can now happen at the consumer level to save energy. And I think that AI is an accelerant couple ways, LLMs and map view, because we are all going to use lots of different apps and types of products, but when the API integrations can happen faster, it's going to be really great for progress. So I'm excited by that area, but I think people are still struggling with how are we going to monetize it. And I think on the B2C side, it's harder. On the B2B side, that's where we're going to see some gains. And so if we can get some of those proven technologies from B2B into B2C, we don't have to burn up as much cash to go and make it happen for consumers.
Very cool.
I'd like to put a little light on some of my fellow founders who are working in biotech. I mean, I could talk about what we're doing with it, and we can do that yet, but I get very excited when I see what's happening in biotech, which is a field I don't deeply understand. But I have friends who are using AI to figure out what kind of cancer a woman with breast cancer actually has, so that the chemo chosen is the one that is needed. Fun fact, 2/3 of all chemo is wasteful, meaning it's not targeting what's actually happening, and of course making the patient sick in the process. I have another friend who's developing a medical device that can figure out what's causing sepsis or a UTI in 30 minutes instead of 3 days. And of course, sepsis can kill you far sooner. I mean, this is happening in real time and just transformative. So exciting.
It is really exciting. You know, I think about every innovation comes with risks. And in my career, I've always taken calculated risks. I have the philosophy about my life that I have no regret decisions, right? So how do you balance, how do you calculate the risks so that you can innovate more quickly, but also make sure that you're ethical and that you are guarding the ethics and privacy and well-being of the users?
I'd like to take a stab at it. I think it's important to have a framework. So basically, first of all, you have a strategic alliances, directions, you know, where we're heading and what kind of innovation we're looking at. But then you really need to have at the top level, have a framework and guidelines to basically in terms of that, including transparency, explainability, and basically inclusions, all the stuff, right? And then, and once you have a high-level guidelines, you basically need to allow people take that risk to do innovation. It's all fall into that certain guidelines. That's something need to be, the cultural, the guideline need to be designed by from the beginning, basically. That's something I believe, yeah.
I had that experience recently as part of an industry consortium. I'm on Home Connectivity Alliance, where different industrial and consumer brands come together and figure out, you know, how we're going to be a rising tide for progress. And one of the issues was the European Data Act, and you know that you cannot use personal information in certain ways. And so we created, like Shin is saying, we created essentially a data governance guidelines. And through that, we were able to like crisply convey that like if a user is involved, we're going to make sure that we get their authorization and that we communicate to them how their data is being used and whether it is give them opt-in for third-party usage. So I think communication is everything when it comes to taking a risk with data, doing something that we never did before, and making sure, you know, to test it out with some users, make sure it actually worked, all the things that are, all the people and entities that are watching you, make that your core. And if that works, tell that story and then expand from there in other application areas.
Absolutely. And maybe I could also give perspective from the Google standpoint, because both in terms of AI and data, because of course, Google is, you know, AI native. You know, as we think about AI, it's in many of the products that are used today. And I think all of them that you may be using or you experience have been leveraging AI for actually decades. I mean, so our thinking though on this is that AI can't take place unless we have considered responsible AI. And so I think we've been pioneers in frameworks that help us to think about responsible AI. I joining Google quickly understood that every single project that we do, every area that we look at needs to go through the lens of responsible AI, whether that's the fairness, accountability, transparency, or explainability of that. And of course, the AI is built on massive amounts of data. That's our mission, to take the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And as we think about that, the areas of both security and privacy are areas that we often talk with the clients and customers that we work with. It's foundational to the work that we do. And technology must be built in a way that enables not only that security, but allows us to meet the privacy needs that are not only regulatory, but are expected by users that use products. All of us are expecting a certain level of privacy, and our systems need to be built to be able to accommodate that, which sometimes is even a higher standard than the regulatory standard. But we have to be committed to being able to meet that.
I think, well, health information protection is clearly the framework that we work within. And after the virtual care model failure, we started down the path of consultative messaging. And that's tricky to the extent that the ideal platforms for informal interaction, and informal interaction is the best one for self-care and advising, can also be more challenging from a privacy point of view. So we've been using AI as much as anything as a gatekeeper of when the conversation needs to shift into a different technology or a different channel, and to flag things that become, that are just different in nature, like a medical problem that actually isn't appropriate for the mode that we're working in. And we have longer term plans for how AI can be incorporated, but for example, in our field in pelvic health, there's no textbook. There's no tome that says this is how it's all done, that you could just feed into a computer and then turn around into some sort of generalizable practice. So like many companies in coaching actually are using humans all the time right now to actually build data sets from which to automate in future. So it's not real time, not yet.
So I have I want to add one more thing. So people always say, let's get more data, more data. So in this case, actually, we need to adopt some kind of data minimization policy as well. Gather the data you need, but let go the data you don't need, personal information if it's not relevant to your product, things like that. That actually will reduce risk. The other thing is there are a lot of great tools, innovation out there. In spending, there's this one company that I actually have been advising, is that they actually can look at the data before you do the training to really understanding, leveraging computer vision. Of course, it's image data, audio, or things like that, and to see whether your data is the right data. Okay, so it's a very interesting. One of the client they work with, and one of the public data they took a model, they analyzed it. It turns out the data is actually, it's a very big company for that specific data come from. It's totally not inclusive. So there are a lot of good tools. There are tools also to do privatize. Remove the private information that's not technology out there. A little bit spending on upfront will actually get you training much faster. It's not always large data give you better results. Sometimes it's a smaller. It's most important is smaller, relevant, high quality data give you the better results.
So you brought up the inclusive stuff. So I want to get into that a little bit. So we talked a little bit about what we want to design is to basically meet the needs of the customer, elevate their experience, set the trends based on what their needs are. If the customers are not represented in the data, if the customers are not represented by in the demographics of the designers and the innovators, do you think that is actually a problem, or do you think that it just kind of works itself out somehow? Because we are entering a climate that is not excited about talking about diversity and inclusion. And I'm okay with that. I just want to know if we're getting ourselves into an area of trouble that we have to then correct if we don't act on it now.
I'm not okay with it. So I give you just right on top of my head. I tell you, a couple years ago, I used the software, trained myself, did a avatar look of myself. And look, very people can see the resemblance. They can say, Shing, that's you. Except it has a lot of things feature same except the eyes. I have blue eyes. And because that model is trained by most of the European data, not Asian data. So it was pretty, but but it's not, if you look closely, it's not me. So I think a woman representing a huge percentage of the user. So not just women, all different kind of races, representations. And I think that we, having a diversity inclusion will really only make the product better and the user experience better. You cover more. I think the opening remark already touched upon some of that. So we have to, yes.
When I said I'm okay with diversity and inclusion not being regulated, I really mean I'm okay if it's not regulated, but it is. Then I personally believe that the companies who do comply with building inclusive products and services, the free market will prevail.
Yes.
You limit your scalability to the people that you understand and whose needs and interests and behaviors you serve. So my goal for my company is to be ubiquitous, global, to meet the needs of female fighters on the battlefield and women in rural America who don't even understand how the product works, but it works for them. And if you're going to have that kind of reach, you do eventually have to understand that variety of needs. Inside, companies, big companies that have that need, it's not uncommon to choose a couple of extremes, design for those, and then check for the main, which is the absolute opposite of marketing, where you look at the bell curve and you go for the mainstream. But marketing and product design are, in league at the end. But in terms of developing new ideas, looking at those extremes can be really educational.
I think it's essential. I think even if the emphasis is not there from a company culture point of view, the global accountability, like you said, is going to be there. Also, the investors that are investing in your company, they've actually benchmarked this. So, that's there. And then just like how you're using that data, we know for products to prevail, segmentation is everything. Personalization with AI is everything. If you actually don't know which demographics are your growing contingents versus your fading contingents, then that's a lack of data integrity. So just not doing it means you're just not listening to your customer or the market, or just, making the right governance decisions for the business long term.
Yeah, I think, the idea of being able to target or see people as monolithic has left a long time ago, right? Even from a marketing standpoint, you mentioned, there's been no more higher level of fragmentation among consumers as we see today. And yet consumers demand that level of personalization. We talk to companies who are saying, I have to learn to live with contradictions. There is, how do I reach Gen Alpha, but then how do I reach the aging consumer? How do I reach consumers who are diversifying in many different ways? Those who are, looking for more value. But by the way, there's a whole other group who are moving into premiumization. So the fragmentation of consumers, whether by race, gender, or any other mark, is there. But I think we see diversity now in such a broad level and in so many different dimensions, which need to be included in how we think about AI, in terms of how we think about the trading of data, how we think about that as being most useful. And you said that, relative to being able to get to the results and the success we need. That's true for me on a business level, but as we think about a company and how we think about being able to meet the needs of users, it's also true in terms of culture, values, and ethics, that your ability to be able to reach and answer those questions in the most useful way need to be in ways that assume that you have trained and removed intentionally biases in the data to get to better outcomes that really meet the needs of consumers and users.
I think it's now more important than ever because so much of the power and the navigation of where the world is going to go is in the hands of a few big companies like yours, Sonia. And the responsibility needs to be there too. And I know that you do, and big companies do, a lot of partnerships with startups. And it's just as important for startups to be engaged in that as well. But I do think that it's a responsibility that the consumers are going to look towards companies to cater to them in that way.
And if I could, I would say that, certainly I think we're seeing that there is no, there's no limit to the number of companies and places where great ideas can come from. I also see that in areas like responsible AI that I mentioned earlier, the need to be able to think about AI not in terms of just the technology, yes, where Google is a leader, but also in terms of the responsibility is a shared outcome. And it's not only a shared business outcome, it's a shared outcome across communities, across governments where regulation is taking place, across so many other groups. And we're pretty intentionally making those choices to really help to form those networks and collaborations to ensure that that takes place. We often say internally that the race is not really one in technology as much as it is in understanding how to apply it responsibly. There we need to do so, and we need to do so in a way that enables us to democratize access and do so in a way that allows us to be able to think more broadly about how we do that.
Yeah, democratizing access. That is another topic that is, could take days to discuss. But would love to hear your thoughts about, as we accelerate so rapidly with technology, are we risking leaving some communities behind and widening the digital divide? And what do you think we should do about that?
So, well, as a startup, we do segmentation, we do go-to-market strategy. Most of company, because they want to raise fund or prove to the investor, they go for their, the large enterprise, targets. And so I think that there are some companies that caught my attention, which I was, part of it and advised or invested, is that they actually take a totally different approach. They look at their missing piece, they're underserved, they're small, medium business. So the large enterprise, they have funding. They have time, say, I'm going to spend the next 12 months doing this project. The smaller company cannot. They don't have the money. They don't have the time. So I think time to value is very important. It requires very innovative pricing strategy. In this case, this specific company, they actually do, you pay by money you saved. So in a way, it's not additional cost. It's like how much you saved, certain percentage is the pricing. Okay. And then the other thing is you have to be, the onboarding has to be fast. So what they did is they basically integrated with a lot of their existing platform, like CRMs. So basically, they really presented to their small, medium company with a very cost-effective solution, enable them to get on the AI train. So I think that's very important, very nice.
That's a very interesting model for pricing.
I think pricing is really important. If you're a company that is serving consumers, you kind of have this public scrutiny responsibility to do that, to not marginalize certain populations. So I think, we all have our core business, right? But if we can take a piece of our business and we can put a new sort of financing program in place, or just change pricing, or pick a certain segment where you can do that and prove it out and show everyone it's possible, then it really, helps serve people. I'll give you an example. We make a lot of smart home products. We make doorbell cameras. We make thermostats and water leak detectors, all that stuff. So we did a project with Habitat for Humanity in a low-income housing community where we used all connected products. And previously, connected products were really kind of for the early adopters and the higher-end price. But we're now at this tipping point where we're going to the mainstream on connected, and we were able to show that the end game was that these people were going to spend less on energy, and they were going to be safer, and that pricing was within reach. So we picked an edge case, proved it out, and then we can back our way through the rest of the portfolio that makes it more addressable to this bigger segment of the population that's on the rise. So I think pricing, like you said, Sheen, is everything here. And if you can pick a segment, prove it, and do it, that says a lot. But don't try to solve like all the world's problems. Just pick one, do it, get the confidence, and then keep going.
Thank you. I know Google's doing a lot. I do a lot with Google in this space. Do you want to talk about?
Yes, I'll talk about it a little bit, because I think in terms of the ability to be able to democratize access, I think that's sort of a core value of our company. For sure, I think that part of this is the work that we do to be able to open source models and tools for companies to use. I mean, transformer technology, as we know, the grandfather of, widely seen to be the grandfather of generative AI technology, was open sourced by Google. And our ability to be able to do so now in the context of where AI is today is also equally important. And so we are intentionally making sure that we open source those models and tools so that there's broader access to it. We've created funds so that nonprofits can actually be funded and have both tool and model, but also training and coaching access to be able to leverage technology to be able to meet those needs. And in fact, another wave of the fund is coming up, over the next month or so for companies to be able to access. Not-for-profits and others have been accessing those. I think it also requires us to be able to drive that training and teaching and coaching, just as we've done for underrepresented groups for a long time. We are really seeking to intentionally partner with companies to be able to make sure that that's available and that's happening. And importantly, that's not happening only for companies today, but also happening also with youth, where we're bringing them in and teaching and training and also enabling them. And this is super important because having that AI model accessibility for developers and even more broadly is going to be a significant discerner of where we'll see AI go more broadly over the next 5 to 10 years. We often say amongst our groups, right, that we really are still only at the beginning of this journey, even though it seems like we've already arrived. We really very much are at the beginning. And so how we treat this area of democratization of access is critically important, and we're very committed to it.
Thank you. I want to ask each of you to think of something that you can leave the audience with, that you want to say in the space of innovation, emerging technologies, technology changing. How do you find yourself navigating this space?
I think about natural selection all the time. I think adaptation is everything, and I think that we should study the technology cycles of the past to think and better plan for what's happening now and what will come in the future. I mean, just being here at CES, I am looking at what's happening with the use of AI, and I think about telecom in the 5G stage and going through that and the monetization of the business model as well as the ubiquity of data and all of that. And I think we can learn. I think about growing up in West Texas and the boom and the bust of the oil economy, and now the energy transition with electric and what we can learn about those supply and demand changes as well as technology. So I think learning from the past, studying the cycles and trying to better predict what will come at us with those similarities, adaptations, everything.
Well said.
I think that, we're all very fortunate to be working here at this time in the context of where AI is today. I think it is going to be transformative, and we know this to be true, right, for communities, for businesses, for people. You were mentioning in science, there's no area that won't be touched by it. I think that for sure, as I think about us navigating it, it is making sure that we are fully tapping into the opportunity to be able to not only use it, but also scale it in companies. And in my role, even touching the consumers and consumer goods, I also think that we cannot leave behind the role of the user as being core to how we both develop it so that it is most successful and can be fully scaled and maximized to its potential.
Thank you.
Well, I have 2 words that I would leave you with, and they are unintended consequences. We all have benevolent aspirations, good intentions, but when you're playing with systems, all kinds of unexpected things happen. So I try and keep my eye on that with regard to my own business. But I think to the extent that all of us are operating with our own silos and agendas and budgets and teams, and we can make a mess. And we've proven historically that sometimes we do. So I would temper optimism with the possibility of unintended consequences and try and do no harm.
So quickly, 2 things. So one thing is actually earlier I mentioned about platform. I didn't say too much about it. I think that there's so much going on in the foundational technologies when you do the innovation or building a product, taking a platform approach. So you build that the workflow, process, but then you can, as the technology rise, your solution continue to rise. So you're not going to be disrupted easily. That's one thing. The other thing is I actually recently read a book called A Unicorn Within by Linda Yates. It's basically taking this, really trying to help the large companies. She works with top 1,000 companies to really have the startup mindset, how to innovate within the large company. I highly recommend that book.
Linda's a very good friend of mine, so it's an awesome plug there. All right. Well, thank you all for joining and giving some of your pieces of your wisdom and sharing it with our audience. And I want to ask if anyone has any last-minute questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
We have our drawing.
Okay.
And we have a winner.
All right. We have a question.
As we talk about responsible AI and perhaps unintended consequences, is there anything that you think in the near term needs to move from a corporate policy to an actual regulation to help manage unintended consequences or even non-benevolent uses of AI?
Like with regards to data, how your data is being used and to whom it's being disclosed is the bare minimum. And I think Europe is ahead of the United States in some regards, and I think we'll follow them in some ways. But I think what data, how it's being used, who it's being shared with is bare minimum that really needs to happen.
I think the transparency is really important in anything that you do. And we're looking to the EU to see what they're doing and trying to learn from the lessons that they're learning to modify it for use in the US. We'll see. But I think the onus is really on the companies. And I am a strong believer that the free market will prevail and that, customers will exercise their voice when they're confronted with brands that don't respect their privacy or, comply with the ethics.
So to build on this notion of transparency, I think to the extent that we start building more and more user experiences where you're interacting with humans and automation that's modeled on that human and then overt automation like chatbots, we need to develop design approaches and aesthetic approaches to help people understand which is which in the moment. Because I think people are open to a lot of automation, but they don't want to be fooled.
I agree with you on the transparency point and the points that we're making here. I mean, I think that certainly regulation is increasing. We've seen that in Europe. We've got CCAP in California. There's new regulation in Latin America. And that's fine, I think, relative to being able to ensure we balance the needs of consumers who want more personalization, but also want to ensure that there's a level of privacy. I think the most important thing about moves that are taking place to be able to ensure that this goes forward in a responsible manner is actually the area of collaboration. There's got to be collaboration among, larger companies in the space, smaller companies in the space who are developing differentiated technologies. As I've said, some of the roles that and needs that we hear coming from our NGOs, what needs to come forward as it relates to government. And so I think the larger question is really one about how do we collaborate to make sure that the future guidelines around AI are going to make that balance between serving the needs of users and consumers and at the same time ensure that the appropriate levels of privacy, the appropriate levels of regulation are in place so that it can grow in a responsible manner. And I think that that's happening and that's coming. It gives me confidence about where we're moving towards.